Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's IWA webinar. This evening will be presented by John Pomfret from the IWA Northampton branch. My name is Bernard Morton, I'm the branch chairman. And John's going to talk to us about how many boat lifts from Gdansk to Ostro by the Elbląg Canal. I believe I pronounced that correctly, John.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, without much more record, I shall pass it over to John. And thank you, John, for this evening's presentation, which will be very, very interesting.
Right. Hello, everybody. Well, tonight we went some boat lifts in Poland, ultimately, when we finally get there. But to start with, I thought we'll just have a look at boat lifts generally. I don't know how many of the listeners are familiar with boat lifts and all the different types. But first of all, well, why would anyone build one? I mean, they sound awfully complicated, don't they? And when you can build locks, we've had locks for 700 years. Why does anybody bother with them? Well, they can have some advantages. They can save water. They can be faster than the locks. Not always, but they can be. They take up less space. Sometimes they can be cheaper to construct, but then in other cases, they were expensive dimensions. They can stop waters mixing and minimize the spread of undesirable species. So there are some reasons for building them. And over the years, people have come up with a huge range of ingenious ways of doing it. We've got slopey sort of lifts, which people tend to call inclined planes for some reason. And there you can have the boat hauled up dry on rollers, just dragged up on skids, on rails or whatever. Or you can put the boat in a tank, which obviously then has to stay level. And you can pull that up on rails, or you can just push a wedge of water up a hill. And then other sorts of lifts are the vertical lifts. Most of those, we have the boat in a caisson, so we call them wet lifts. And the caisson might be lifted by a ram or by cables, or even by a rotating system. But there are dry vertical lifts as well, where the boat is literally lifted out of the water in the dry and taken usually over some sort of barrier and dropped in on the other side. So it's like a traveling crane. And if we just look at some examples, I mean, boat lifts have been around a very long time. So in the 16th century in Amsterdam and all over the Netherlands, actually, but particularly in Amsterdam, where the canals were full of salt water in those days because Amsterdam was connected to the sea in those days. And the waterboards on the polders inland didn't want salt water getting into their waterways because they wanted to water their tulips and it wouldn't do them any good. So there were barriers. There were dikes between the canals in Amsterdam, for example, and all the canals in the hinterland, and boats were hauled up one side of the dike with these big wheels, a couple of men with the leverage of a huge wheel like that, driving a shift, which then pulled the boat, in that case, just up some skids. Presumably you could grease them, but fairly primitive, and the boats were pulled up one side and let down the other side. And the picture in the middle at the bottom shows a preserved one near Enkhuizen in North Holland. So really, you could say that's probably the simplest sort of lift. And people thought, well, if we put wheels on them, they'll go more easily. So at the top there, you've got Trench inclined plane on the Shrewsbury Canal, where tugboats went up there on cradles with wheels. But the boat still just went up at an angle, so it didn't matter for tugboats, for the little short boats that we used on the Shrewsbury Canal and the Shropshire Canal. But if you get longer boats, then when you bring them down and start sticking them into the water, if they're on a slope, then obviously you've got the danger that the bow ends up submerged while the stern's still out of water, particularly with something long like a narrowboat. So there were some disadvantages of those primitive ones. Alternatively, you don't have to have rails. You can just have a road trailer and a tractor. I was at the bottom at Slappy on the Vltava in the Czech Republic, and this is the boat lift arrangement for your boats, small cruisers and rowing boats and things. Boats up to 4 tons are just basically hauled out of the water on a trailer behind a tractor and put back in the other side of the dam. There is a plan there to build a big caisson type transverse inclined plane lift, but it's been a plan for about 50 years and they still haven't done it. Maybe they will do one day. But putting things on rails was pretty popular, and some of them got a bit silly, really. Like in America, the Allegheny Portage Road, there was a railway canal. It ran for 58 kilometers. It did change level, but you can see you had a huge range, really. All over the world as well. The middle picture there at the top, the Kiyagi lift in Kyoto in Japan. That's now a popular tourist attraction with cherry blossom trees planted all the way down the sides of it. And then in Germany, you've got these Lorenbahnen round a lot of the locks, so that's small boats like the rowing boat at the top right, or the little cruiser at the bottom left, avoiding through each lock just by being pulled up either by hand, or in the case of the one at the bottom, there's a hand winch. You can wind your boat all the way up there. And there are about 50 of these still working in Germany. You can get a bit cleverer with rails. You can try and keep your boat level. So this one in the middle at the bottom, it's Orlik, again on the Vltava in the Czech Republic. You see the trolley there, the boat level by having the longer legs down to the back wheels than to the front wheels. But of course, if you then take that over the top of the dam and down the other side, it'll be at a horrendous angle. So you'll see in the picture, it's just coming up onto a turntable, which will then turn it round so that it can then go back down the other way, the other side of the summit. In the background there's a bigger lift, which is, again, was started a long time ago and has never been finished. But you can do clever things. You can get away without a turntable. So the Big Chute Marine Railway in Canada on the Trent-Severn Waterway, which is the third inclined plane lift on that site, they were going to replace it by a lock. But then nature considerations, they decided they didn't want certain sorts of lamprey transferred from one set of lakes to another, and so they just built another marine railway, as they call them. But there, the top and bottom wheels run on separate sets of rails, and as you go into the water, the different sets of rails change level so that it keeps the boat level on the trolley. And then, of course, you've got the ones with caissons, the wet lifts. So Foxton I'd already mentioned. That only lasted 10 years because of the cost of keeping the steam engines going, and the fact that you can get down Foxton 10 locks in half an hour anyway, so it didn't really save very much time. But there are these caisson type inclined plane lifts around. So Osvier on the Rhine-Marne Canal will take Peniche of about 350 tons, and then a marine lift at Ronquier, which will take class 4 barges, 1,350 ton barges, and you can see that's a longitudinal one. All of those have watertight doors at each end. You can get away with just one set of watertight doors, like the one at Krasnoyarsk in Russia in the middle picture at the bottom. But of course, if you do that, you have to have a turntable, as you saw at Orlik. So that's a huge lift. I mean, that'll take 1,500 ton boats. And so the turntable at the top is turning around a whole assembly weighing several thousand tons, a fairly impressive sort of thing. Or you can do away with the tank, the caisson altogether, and just try and push a wedge of water up a hill, which is what they did at Montec and Fonsaran the Canal du Midi, and Montec on the Garonne. But neither of them worked very well, and the Fonsaran one, they reverted to the locks, and this one at Montec's been out of use for donkey's years. In theory, it may still be repaired one day, but it's pretty unlikely, I think. And then vertical lifts, well, you're probably all familiar with Anderton lift between the Trent Mersey Canal and the Weaver, and that's sort of fairly straightforward principle that you put your boat into a tank and it just goes vertically upwards or vertically downwards to the other level. And that used in Germany, the Niederfinau lift on the Havelode Canal, but just a bit bigger. That'll take 1,000-ton boats rather than a pair of narrowboats. But that's not big enough. That was built in 1934. So now they're building a new one, which you see on the right of that picture at the top. They've tested it with water in the caissons so far, but they haven't had a boat through it yet, but it's supposed to open this year. It sounds as if it quite likely will do. And that'll take boats carrying over 2,000 tons. All sorts of different designs. So although it does exactly the same thing, the Peterborough lift lock, as they call it, again on the Trent Severn Waterway in Canada at the bottom, looks very different from the Anderton lift, but it still works with a hydraulic ram, which is how the Anderton lift works now. It's very much the same principle, just a completely different design. And then we've got the Three Gorges lift, which is probably the biggest boat lift in the world. That takes the smaller boats, the 3,000 ton, up to 3,000 ton boats. The bigger boats go through the 5 locks, so you get some idea of how big a river the Yangtze really is. But it only takes about 45 minutes if you go up in the lift. It takes about 4 hours to go through the locks. And finally, we've got the you can be perverse, and instead of making the tank just go vertically up and down, you can make it go round and round, as they do at the Volker lift. There's a vertical lift because you end up vertically above where you started, but you take a trip out to the side on the way. Then another sort of lift, when I was in Mexico, we went for a trip on these trajineras in Xochimilco near Mexico City. These are just big punts. You can see a punt pole there at the top there. They're just like, they handle just like punts, even though they weigh about 5 tons. And there you go out on these groups of, they'll take up to about 20 people, and the waterways just absolutely crowded with other boats selling everything under the sun. So if you want a beer or something to eat, you just wave at the boat selling beer or whatever. Or if you want some music, you wave at a boat with a mariachi band on it and give them some money, and they'll play for 10 minutes for you alongside your boat and so on. But the crowded bit of the waterway is a bit polluted, and they take you on the trip through into a nature reserve, which is, they try and keep clean because it's the home of axolotls, which are quite rare, strange amphibians that never grow up. And when we got to the lock there, it wasn't like an ordinary lock at all. It was just like a crane, traveling crane. So the boat, as you see there, just lifted up on a platform. It moved horizontally across the barrier and then lowered down into water at a different level, and there's no water mixing at all. Picture on the right shows us waiting for a boat coming down the other way so we can go up. And I'd never seen that before, but they've been around a long time. In the 1920s, quite a few of the overtombs in the Netherlands were replaced by these sorts of travelling lifts. So Postjesweg Overhaal was really replaced the overtomb that you saw right at the beginning. And the Brokerhaven Overhaul, just near Enkhuizen in North Holland, that's been restored by volunteers and is run by volunteers, and you can still use it and take your boat through it. You can see how the two, like lock chambers, but with the water at different levels, and your boat just gets lifted out of one of them, moved across, and dropped into the other one. And they're still building them, and they settle on this principle to get boats over dams and much bigger boats. So there have been over 100 boat lifts around the world on inland navigations. 150 if you include the little railways in Germany, the Lorenbahnen. And there are about 50 still working today. About 20 of them are big modern lifts in China, and then about 30 scattered around the rest of the world, plus at least 40 Lorenbahnen still working. And 5 out of these 50, 5 of them are on one single canal in Poland. And we'll get there eventually. That's where we're off to. So that's enough wittering on about principles of boat lifts. It's time to have a bit of a tour. And this is where we're going, in the yellow circle there at the top, around one of Poland's main towns called Gdansk. And this is around the delta area of the Wisła, the Vistula, one of Poland's main rivers, which you can see coming through Krakow near the bottom of the map and heading north through Warsaw and Bydgoszcz and down to Gdansk. The other main river is the Odra on the left, which forms part of it forms the border with Germany. And the popular bits of the Polish inland waterway system for pleasure craft are the bit we're going to look at, and the bit further to the east there in the Great Masurian Lakes, where there's lots of lakes all connected by stretches of canal. And pleasure boating is pretty popular in those areas. But it's all when you look at the history, as the history of an awful lot of mainland Europe is very complicated. So this 1799 map shows Prussia as it was, which includes parts of what is now Poland, parts of what is now Russia, part of what's now Lithuania. And the capital was Königsberg. The capital is still called Kingstown, which is what Königsberg means in German, obviously, but it's now Kaliningrad because that's Kingstown in Russian. But it was all part of Germany from 1871 onwards, except Gdansk, where the yellow spot is there, had some independence because that was a free city-state, and it was a Hansa League port. The Hansa League was a sort of confederation of ports in Northern Europe, a bit like an early version of the common market. They had sort of free trade agreements between them. But after the two world wars, it's all changed. So West Prussia became part of Poland after World War I, so changed from German control to Polish control. Then East Prussia after World War II was split up between Poland, Russia, and Lithuania. And so the bit we're looking at is quite near the border with the enclave of the isolated Kaliningrad enclave. So it's not connected to the rest of Russia, but it's part of Russia. But many Polish waterways were built in German times, because as here, the peak of waterway building was in the sort of late 18th century and through the first half of the 19th century, and that's the period when it was Prussia and then parts of the German Empire. So you'll find a lot of the waterways have German names as well as Polish names. Anyway, that's enough of political history, because I'll probably start getting it wrong if I say more. Let's look at the geography, and this is the delta of the Wisła, the Vistula. Typical sort of delta, obviously, with lots of the main river coming in and lots of distributaries. But the thing to notice here is that at the top of the picture, you see Gdansk at the top left. That was one outlet to the sea. The only other outlet to the sea for the Wisła was right at the other end of the Wisła Lagoon, off the map to the right. So all these waterways that you can see there, including running along just inside the coast, they're all inland sheltered waterways. So the safe inland waterway route from Gdansk inside the spit to Elbląg and to all these other towns as are marked on there. And the whole area is very similar to the UK fens, and it's sort of got the same sort of history, really. If you look at the UK fens, you find there were lots and lots of lakes, and most of it was marsh with islands like the Isle of Ely. And it's the same here. If you look at the amount of water showing here in this central bit and over to the western end, and then look at how it is now, an awful lot of that water has disappeared. And south of Elbląg, we have Lake Trusno, which is really just a small lake now, whereas it was part of a huge lagoon on the previous picture. So today there's less water area because of agricultural drainage, and also the route of the Wisła through Gdansk got blocked up in 1840 because the ice, I mean, it always freezes in winter. The ice had melted and moved around into sort of pack ice and then froze again and melted again. And the net result was the river basically got blocked by ice. So a great dam of ice built up, and so it backed up behind it and broke its way through the dunes and created a new exit to the sea, that one marked 1840. Then in 1895, they deliberately built another new exit, moved a lock that was previously to the left of the 1840 outlet, moved that to just to the left of the 1895 outlet. And that's how we are today. So again, very similar to the UK fens, where the main outlet channel of the River Nene and of the Witham and of the Great Ouse, they're all artificial channels. They don't bear any relation to the natural rivers. And so we have the Wisła, the main river, is effectively a high level carrier. The fens are pumped up into it, and you look down into the waterways on either side of it. Again, just the same as locking down into the Witham navigable drains from the Witham, or locking down into the middle level from the Nen at Peterborough. Because with agricultural drainage, the land shrunk, and a lot of it is now very low. And so the main flow of the Wisła doesn't go through Gdansk anymore. So the river through there is called the Martwa Wisła, the dead Vistula. But the fact it is dead in terms of it doesn't have strong currents and doesn't have floods makes it all the better for boating. And although some of these waterways, as you see, are connected to the sea, there are no tides, so tidal waterways don't really exist. Again, it makes it all very comfortable for boating. So let's start in Gdańsk, or Danzig. Obviously, when most of these waterways were built, that was what it was called, the German name. And very nice historic city. As with many cities in Poland, it was severely bashed about during the last war, but they have done a pretty good job of restoring it. There was because it's such a historic city, there was very strong pressure to use as much of the original material as they possibly could, and to make sure that the restoration was, as authentic as it possibly could be. And it's an amazing place. I would definitely recommend it as a place to visit. And this is looking at the waterways a bit. We've got the dead Wisła coming through, a corner cut off by the Masurian Canal, built in 1904. That's all parts of the docks, big ships along there and stuff. But fortresses and so on near the entrance, because obviously Gdansk wanted to defend itself from that direction. And then where the old city is, the pink bit there has a city wall around it. Most of it's still there. And then the yellow bit had a moat all around it. You can see some of this on the right here, the zigzag thing with all these bastions sticking out, so you could fire along the moat at any invaders. And the little thing on the right just shows you where we're talking about. This is Gdansk in the Gulf of Gdansk, which has a spit sticking out, rather like Spurn Point on the Humber, called the Hell Peninsula, with a town called Hell at the end. And at the top end of Gdansk, on the Motława, which is the smaller river you saw on the map before, there was the lock, which protected Gdansk from floods, and still does actually. It's got floodgates in it, but also it was the defensive. It was the lock through the defensive barrier that was protected by the moat. So it's got all these little towers where archers, presumably in the early days, could sit and fire on you if you were an unwelcome visitor by boat. But the waterfront itself in Gdansk, all these buildings that you see along on the left are part of the city wall, really, and there are defended gates through them, which had big doors. Some of them had portcullises and so on. But the actual city wall all along this bit is basically buildings. And if you looked at it from the other side, on the left, this picture is the Long Market, the main street in Old Gdansk, and at the end is the Green Gate, where you see the four arches, which would have had doors on to defend the city. And the black and white buildings on the right are over the other side of the river, so you can see how the river is very close to the center of the city. So the quayside, from the quayside to the market, was a couple of steps really. And on the island on the other side of the river, there were hundreds of granaries at one time. This one, dating from 1620s, is now a hotel that you can go and stay in. And this is one of the gates, this St. Mary's Gate, the Brahma Mariatska, which leads straight up to the huge basilica, St. Mary's Basilica in the middle of town. And that's just an example of these defended gates. And the big thing that people go to see along the waterfront is the crane, dating from 1444 as the biggest crane in Europe. And it lifted 4 tons, which in those days was a huge amount. And the way you lifted it was these hamster wheels. There are 2 of these, as you see in the picture on the right. And you just had a crowd of men in there walking around the treadmill and winding a rope onto a shaft and lifting huge weights. And there were 2 different, it sticks out 2 different distances. There were 2 different cranes inside there. And you can go in and look around it. You're not allowed to go and try the hamster wheels out, unfortunately. And if you want to sit by water, well, you can hire some pretty dodgy looking little boats, really. I mean, here, strangely, you're in the harbour area here, the official harbour area. So if you're in a bigger boat, you're supposed to have some sort of certificate. But boats below a certain size, there's no regulation. So you can go and hire one of these little things and go and mix it with the big ships if you're really daft enough. But it's quite a fun way of seeing the waterfront. And if you hire a boat or go in your own boat or anything, there is a marina with all services just across from the crane you can see in the background. So it's pretty well provided for boating. And as you go down the river, if you have a look down towards the sea first, that's sort of the corner of the wall. So that's where the riverside wall made up of all the buildings turns inland and becomes more an ordinary wall. That's called the Swan Tower. And then going down, the islands on the right are being sort of redeveloped and becoming very popular. And to cope with the traffic, they've built a new footbridge with a 70-metre span, which is pretty big footbridge, really. They spent a lot of money on this, a lifting footbridge. And that boat has probably just been to Hell and back, because you can do a day trip to Hell and come back again, you hope. Further down the river, you'll pass the shipyard area, which you saw on the map. Most of the shipyards are on that sort of loop that was cut off by the Masurian Canal. But this is was born in 1980, and eventually the electrician who formed the union and started a movement in Poland. Eventually, the shipyard electrician became the president. Further down, we've got the Wisła fortress, and there's a marina, well, a boat club, I should say, on one side, the nearest side. On the other side, the river police station there has also, the river police have moved out and they've converted it to visitor mooring. So if you do go with a hire boat or your own boat, there are places you can moor, even though it's a big waterway with big ships and stuff. And right down at the bottom, you come to the Westerplatte Memorial, the memorials to the defenders of the coast. This is where the Second World War started. This was a big memorial there. It's where the first shots of the Second World War were fired. And on the right, a more peaceable thing, you can go up the lighthouse and get a pretty good view of everything. And you can get all the way down there on trip boats that go across the Hell, or just trip boats down to Westerplatte, or the water taxi. There's a routine water taxi service, the normal city transport, like buses and trams and so on, and it just stops at various stops on the way down there, water bus stops. So it's easy to get down there. And similarly, you can get in the other direction. We're now looking to head east along the Mart of Wisła. Again, you can get quite a long way along here, just on routine water taxis, water buses. You pass under a couple of new bridges, new railway bridge and new road bridge, to serve the ever-expanding port of Gdansk. It's by far the biggest port in Poland, and it'll accommodate the biggest container ships that can get into the Baltic. Probably could accommodate Ever Given, if that will actually get into the Baltic past Denmark, I'm not sure. It's been in the news recently, obviously. And this road bridge, as lots of things in Poland, is called the John Paul II Bridge, and the Poles, a good Catholic country there, quite understandably, inordinately proud of the fact they've had a Polish Pope, so everything under the sun is called after Pope John Paul. As we come further along, we've sort of coming, Gdansk we're looking back towards Gdansk, and the narrow bit on the left is where the first lock was after the river broke through in 1840. So they built a lock there to protect Gdansk from the Wisła floods. But that's now been taken away, and in fact, it's recently been widened because it was only 30-metre wide, and they couldn't get boats through it. The boats getting bigger than that. But there are plenty of places for small boats, and this is at the Yacht Club Conrad, just around the corner. You saw the Yacht Club Neptune just on that picture, and they've all got visitor moorings if you hire a boat. Or you can go and stay in these sort of wooden tents, which is glamping, really, I suppose. It's just like staying in a caravan with the facilities they've got in them. But I thought they were quite cute, really. And as you go further along, this is between the 1840 outlet and the new 1895 outlet. So the bit you see on the far side of this picture is actually an island. And for a long time, the only way onto this island, apart from by boat, was across this pontoon bridge. So there was a pontoon bridge put in 1963, and it was replaced by a bigger and better one in 1975. And it's only a couple of years ago, it was superseded by a new proper lifting bridge. And the pontoon bridge has gone away. But this was the pontoon bridge, and it had a swinging bit in the middle, or swinging, floating bit, however you call it. which would open for boats, so they see it's open for quite a small yacht to go through, and the little inset shows it closing again. But that was quite a unique, well, unique thing, but it's not there anymore, unfortunately, because it's been replaced by a posh new bridge. This is just before the new bridge was finished, so the old bridge is still in place and in use. But there's a twin bascule lifting bridge now, but most pleasure boats can get under it without it opening anyway. And then you come to the relocated lock, Przegalina Lock, which is plenty big enough for any pleasure boats. This is actually a barge, unfitted out barge that was built a long way up towards Warsaw at a shipyard up there, and it's being pushed down well, it's going to be towed to Netherlands for fitting out and used as a tanker. But I thought that was quite an unusual picture, because it's the only time I've seen a canal tug with a helicopter on it, and I have no idea what the story is there. But you know, it's obviously a regular thing. He's got an H on his deck there, so whether it's just a skipper who was a keen helicopter pilot or what, I have no idea. I mentioned that the Wisła up to Warsaw is not particularly in a good state. It's quite silted up and so on, but they are trying to get more traffic going on it. And in the distance there's a container barge that was a couple of years ago went up on a sort of publicity mission, you know, to demonstrate you can get container barges up there, and it stopped at all sorts of different places on the way up and had meetings with the mayor and the Chamber of Commerce and everything to try and promote the river. The nearer boat is just a heavy lift, a heavy load that they go up the river anyway when required quite regularly. This was some bits of equipment for a paper mill somewhere up the river. So now we've come from Gdansk in the top left-hand corner of the map. We've come as far as the Wisła. We've come through Przegalina Lock onto the main river, and we're now on the Żuławy loop. This is really being heavily promoted for waterway tourism. And you'll see that there are some anchors marked in blue on the map. Those are little marinas, or moorings, overnight moorings and things that they've made. Then the other ones in red are ones that were planned when this map was done. But I think actually every single one of those is now in place, apart from the one at Kniev at the bottom. So you know, they've done a lot of work on building places where you can stop and where there are services and everything, to try and encourage people to hire boats and go around this loop. It's about 200 kilometers basic circuit. It takes you a week. You know, it's in a fairly flat area, so not a huge number of locks. And if you go around the circuit, you can then divert off to Gdansk, where we've just been, and to Elbląg, and where we're going to go, and also this little river in the middle up to Nowy Dwór. The Tuga, you can go up there. So there's a good range of things, and you can also go to the other end. Well, not the other end. You can go as far as near the Russian border and go up this river to Braniewo, just in the middle of the map there. So there's a lot of scope really for interesting boating around there. And this is where we enter this is where we come off the Wisła, off the main Vistula, and sort of enter really the Fenland area. This is Gdansk Lock. You see there the boats coming in ready to go down. They'll only open one gate for you unless they really have to open both, because there's still manual. So this green Dalek thing in the left-hand bottom inset, the lockkeeper has to put a windlass on that and wind forever to open and close the gates. But a single gate 6 meters wide, so most pleasure craft don't have getting through there. There are also, you'll see some floodgates just under the opening bridge at the back for when the Wisła's in flood, to protect the fenlands, and they can be used to make the lock longer. So there's a hotel boat that works through here that actually has to use the floodgates to get through the lock, because it's too long to actually fit in the proper lock. And around here, it's fenland. So there were drainage mills, and there are actually very few left, but there are a couple, and this is one at Drewnica, which there's a local group trying to restore it. And the other typical thing around here, these arcaded houses, often the houses are a lot older than the 19th century. In the 19th century, they had extensions put on with these arcades with the pillars, so you could drive carts underneath and load agricultural produce to and from the loft above it. And an interesting thing you'll come to a bit further along at Rubina is a hand-worked railway swing bridge. I don't know of any others. I mean, obviously we have a number of railway swing bridges in the UK, but none of them is hand-worked. This is on a preserved railway, again run by volunteers, run by the Polish Iron Railroad Society. And they usually leave the bridge open for navigation, but when one of the little trains is coming along, it requires two guys to get out there with this T-bar that you see and walk round and round and round and round and round and round for ages. It's very low geared because the bridge is obviously quite heavy, but it is opened and closed entirely by hand. And at the bottom you see one of the little narrow gauge trains going over there. You can go on the railway. It's a tourist railway now. And then you come to the junction at Rubina. It's a bit like play school, isn't it? Shall we go to the right through the yellow bridge, or shall we go to the left through the blue bridge? The left through the blue bridge will take you to the Wisła, which will take you out into the lagoon. So you either go that way and come back again, or you have to go across the lagoon, and you are supposed to have some sort of qualification for the hire boats if you want to go out in the lagoon. But my impression is they'll accept a helmsman certificate would be fine. A yacht master would definitely be fine. So I don't think they're too fussy so long as you show some qualification. And this is one of the hire bases. These are the sort of boats you can hire to go around the system. And on the right, on the main line of the Skarpawa, which we're following, you see the hotel boat I mentioned. This is an 80-meter longer hotel boat that works between Gdansk and Elbląg. Well, I hope it will again. Obviously, all the things I'm talking about are based on what was happening before the pandemic, and the hotel boat at the moment is in Belgium. It's gone back home, but hopefully once they're able to run again, they will be doing so. And if you go along through the blue bridge on the left, you head towards the lagoon, which you can see in the distance. But at Strutowo, there's a marina there. You can moor, or you can hire boats from there, or there are trip boats from there as well. There's also a prisoner of war camp there, if that's the sort of thing you want. And if you do go across the lagoon, go up this little river called the Posłega, and end up in Braniewo, which is a very historic town, although the Bishop's Palace at the top, all that's left is one bit of a tower. But there are lots of other things like the old granary and so on. And they've built this brand new marina there, so proper floating mooring on the river. And if you go up the steps at either end, there's all the normal marina facilities. Or you can go up the Tuga. That's a bit maybe of an uninviting middle of the winter picture. That's the only picture I could find, with bits of ice on the mud and so on. But in the summer, it's much nicer. And there, although you can get under them with a lot of smallish boats anyway, the two lift bridges on the way are being restored. Well, the one in the town in Nowy Dwór has been restored by volunteers again, so there's quite a strong volunteer waterway movement over there. The other one's being restored. But if we carry on towards the lagoon, but on the Skarpawa, so we don't actually have to go out into the lagoon, this is another of the hire boats you can hire, and another of the new marinas. And we're going to carry on round the circuit back to the Wisła for now, but this on the left is the canal Jagiellonski, which was built way back in the 15th century, and that connects us to Elbląg. So that's the way we'd need to go later on to get to the Elbląg Canal. But for now, we should head to Malbork, where there's a brand new marina, lots of space, or you can moor on some public moorings just on the left of this picture, below the castle, and go and see the biggest brick-built castle in Europe. It just goes on for miles. It's huge. And the locks on here, a little bit smaller, but still, they'll generally only open one gate for you. You see the lock keeper there winding and winding and winding. but all quite well kept and pretty. And eventually we come back to the main river, the Wisła, and there you'll see that this is a lot either way depending on the relative levels. So at the moment it's for going uphill as you come off the Wisła, but the big gates are for going downhill from the Wisła, and just as the picture in front there are floodgates. So it's got 10 gates, five pairs of gates, this lock. So not quite as good as Torksey off the Trent, which has 6 pairs, but it's still got a lot of gates. And in the background is the new visitor mooring they've built. And if you go off to the right, the old, the Great Outlet, as it's called, had a lock on the left-hand side. The lock's now level through. And for a long time, though, they just used it still for drainage and would only open the doors at the other side enough to let, enough for what was needed for drainage. But the local waterway group has now persuaded the Waterway Authority that when the gates are open, they should open the gate on the channel through the lock fully so that boats can get through there. So you can actually go up the River Lever now for a few kilometers, and there are moves afoot to try and gradually extend the navigation up there. It needs a bit of tree cutting and all this sort of thing. It's not an officially maintained navigation, but people are trying to sort of push the boundaries. But back on the main river, on the Wisła, if we headed upstream, there are a few places that are well worth seeing, like Gdańsk, with all this row of 14th century granaries along the river. And then coming back down, there's Gniew, which has its statutory castle. They've all got castles and the ferry. And then Chev, the waterfront, where again they've built some very posh new moorings, boater facilities, and a restaurant you see there on the just where these are new small boat moorings, and there's a restaurant there. Unfortunately, it's closed at the moment. It's up for sale. So I think that's one of the victims of the pandemic. But hopefully, things might recover afterwards. But the moorings are still there, and the facilities are still there. But you can see how this was once a very busy commercial waterfront. So that's the Żuławy loop. We've just done a quick whiz round. And just a point that if you want to know more about it, there is a very thorough navigation and tourism guide in English at that website. The locks are worked by lock keepers. They're closed in winter, but then it's likely to be frozen in winter anyway. And the thing, if you do hire a boat to go around there, is to check up the bridge opening times, because they'll mostly open on request, but some of them they'll only open on the hour or something like that. So and some of them won't open at rush hour and things like that. And there aren't many wide fuel stations yet. So, but I think if you hire a boat, you'll probably find you've got enough fuel for a week. And it's best to go clockwise, so you're going downstream on the main river, because the other rivers haven't got much of a flow at all. So I mentioned the entrance to the canal, Glionsky. That leads us to the river Elblag and the Elbląg Canal, which when the canal was built, it was the Oberländische Canal, because as I said, it was built in the days of German Empire. So just to recap, if you like, we've come from Gdansk on the left, we've come round the Żuławy loop, and now we're going to go up the river Elbląg and up the Elbląg Canal and have a look what's over that neck of the woods. And Elbląg, well, it was a port from the Middle Ages. It was also a Hansa League port, and it became an important shipbuilding centre during the German times. But from 1945, it's been part of Poland. It was run down when it went back into Poland, because obviously at the end of the war. But it was re-established as a seaport in the 1950s. But the only sea access is through what is now Russia, because Prussia was split up into Poland and Russia. And Russia sort of has been a bit awkward over the years about access. They sort of restricted access severely for several years, and it affected the port. And funnily enough, although Russia's quite awkward, most of the traffic from the port is to Russia, is just barge traffic to and from Kaliningrad. But the Polish government have decided that they want their own access to Elbląg, and they're building a new canal lock so that they can bypass Russia, and it's due for completion next year. And there's also, I said the pontoon bridge we saw earlier was almost unique because there is one on the Elbląg River, which will also be replaced. And this is, you can see how starting in the middle of the Gulf of Gdansk at the moment, you have to come way to the east into the entrance to the lagoon inside Russia, and then come all the whole length of the lagoon to get to Elbląg. But if they build just a canal through the spit here, which is only a couple of kilometers, then obviously they can make a much shorter route. And that's what it's going to look like. There's only the Polish towns on the spit have only one access road, and although they're quite small places, they're very popular tourist resorts, and they were very worried about having this canal because they thought it might cause traffic jams when swing bridges were open. But hopefully they've had their concerns assuaged because there are going to be two swing bridges, same sort of system as we have at Cumberland Basin in Bristol in the UK, and with the new bridges on the Caledonian Canal with the Inverness Western Link Road, for instance, have two bridges. When one bridge is open, the other one's open to the canal, then the other one's always open to the road, and the traffic's just diverted over one or the other. So this is the setup itself. There's not much difference in level. The difference in levels is only arises due to wind and atmospheric pressure, so it can be very small, but they don't want salt water getting into this end of the lagoon because it's an important nature reserve. So that's why there will be a lock with gates, and as in common with most new locks on big waterways, I mean, this is 25-meter wide lock, there'll be sliding gates, caisson gates, just the same as we have on the IWA waterway at Heybridge Basin on the Chelmer and Blackwater, in fact. So I mean, there are plenty of big locks in the UK with caisson gates, but you'll see that the gates are shown in blue on this mock-up. You'll see there are two gates at each end. That's just duplication to improve reliability. So if one gate needs maintenance, they use the other one. So hopefully it should never be closed except when the ice gets too thick. And this bridge, they plan to replace it, although this is the other pontoon bridge. The gap between those yellow posts when the bridge is open is 20 meters, more than 20 meters wide. So it will already take the biggest ships they plan to get up to Elbląg, but it's not terribly efficient. And this is the port area. You'll see the barge that's in the foreground is typical, and the one that's moored up at the back there, typical of the ones that go to Russia, to Kaliningrad. The barge train on the left, the two barges and a tug, are typical of the ones that come through from Gdansk or from sun dredging on the Wisła. And there is a new marina in the port area as well. But once you get above the port area, it's very much the domain of the pleasure craft, and this probably gives a slightly sort of optimistic impression of the amount of traffic, because, as I said, some of the bridges, and this is one in question. This is a main bridge in the middle of the town. It will only open, I think it's on the hour or something. So if you tend to get in the summer a queue of craft waiting for its opening time. And that's why there's such a horde of them. But for all that it's a new drawbridge built in 2013, the road surface on it is wooden blocks, as you see on the right. When I was there, some of them were looking decidedly the worse for wear, but they have apparently done a big maintenance program on it last year. So, but it did surprise me to find a brand new bridge effectively, but still with traditional wooden block road. And that takes you up into the town of Elbląg. You can moor these visitor moorings right underneath the cathedral tower. So yeah, it's very, very convenient for the town centre. The town has been restored again, from bombing and so on. Not quite as well as Gdansk, though. I mean, a lot of the restoration has been using concrete. So although everything's the same shape as it used to be, it's not quite got the historic feel, but still pleasant enough. And once you get a bit beyond there, you go through the Lake Druzhno, that huge lake that is now a tiny lake, and then you get onto the canal to connect the East Prussian Oberland, so it's called the Oberländische Canal, with Elbing, as it was in Prussian. And first of all, they linked a lot of the lakes up at the top end with 4 locks, which are now self-service locks, as they call them, so they don't have lock keepers. And the main canal up from Elbląg was planned with 32 locks, but in the end they built it with 5 locks and 4 lifts, 4 inclined planes, driven by undershot water wheels. And the 5 locks were eventually replaced by a more modern inclined plane, more modern in the fact that instead of being driven by a traditional water wheel, it was driven by a Francis turbine, because water wheels had sort of developed into more efficient turbines by then. And it was closed from 1939, and it wasn't until 1948, a few years after the war, that it was actually restored to use. And there's some very clever things I mentioned in the original thing about lifts, about how the Big Chute Marine Railway has different sets of wheels that run on rails at different levels to keep the boat level as it goes up and down. Well, that keeps the boat level all the way up. These don't. Here the boat slopes, as you'll see, as we go up the lifts. But when the boat's actually put into the water, it levels off, because there are extra flanges on the wheels which come onto extra rails, which you can't see, but they're underwater. And it'll take boats 3.2 meters wide. The locks are 35 meters long, so sort of quite similar in many ways to a little bit bigger, but the locks look very similar to our narrow locks in this country. And if you go up from Elbląg, there's about 115 miles of waterway you can go on, including the lakes. So, you know, decent week's cruising, really. And this is where we're talking about. So Elbląg is at the top there. You can see the bits of the Żuławy loop there with Malbork, where the castle was. We're going to go up through the lake, up through 5 lifts, and then we'll have a quick look at the lakes at the top end. And I mean, anybody can go up the lifts. If you hire a boat, you know, you can go up the lifts with your hire boat. That's fine. Or if you have your own boat there. But the way we did it, we went and spent a week in Gdansk, and we just got the train to Elbląg and got the trip boat up there that takes you through all 5 lifts and then gives you a bus back. So it's all sort of an all-in type of organised trip. And this is one of the trip boats that takes you. And first of all, you go through this lake, which there's a navigation channel through the middle of it. A lot of it's full of reeds and wildlife, and it's quite a wildlife sanctuary with lots of white egrets. As you see, the one taking off there. And there were lots of the rivers that went off this lake were navigable, and there are still some lift bridges. None of them usable. Well, lift and swing bridges. So the River Tina at the top, that's the best preserved one. Dated from 1895, but there are other ones like this, the one at the bottom, which is in a bit of a state, but you can still see that it was a lift bridge. And then the bottom, that's a swing bridge built in 1938, but doesn't swing anymore. So you can go exploring the industrial archaeology if you get a car or something. But carrying on up the main canal, we see a mooring place with people waiting, and you look at the sign, you find, we've got to the first boat lift, here we are. And our boat's now in a cradle, like this one you see on the left, and we're going up the lift on these rails. And the big wheel at the bottom takes a wire from the bottom of this carriage, round some wheels at the side, over the top, round another wheel that's half submerged, and then back up to the carriage we're on, and then the same at the top round the winding engine house, so that the carriages can be pulled down the hill as uphill, because with the friction and when they're leveling off at the bottom, you see the ropes do get tight, so they do need to get pulled into the water. So the return wheel in the middle of the canal is sort of quite a feature, really, and a nuisance to navigation, really, but yeah, you get past it, it's all right. And they're going up the lift at the top. The carriage goes back into the water, and we're just sailing out of it, and you can see the operator there just climbing down the ladder at the end to get on the gangway. But that's the lift that was built later, and that's slightly different at the top. The canal goes around a bend, and the wires that operate the carriages just come out of the bank across some pulleys, and the engine house, everything's inside because it's just a small Francis turbine that drives it rather than a big water wheel. But when we get to the next ones, we'll see how the traditional way of working them is. So we potter along here, passing another trip boat, and we're now approaching the next lift. We'll see there's a boat on the left just heading up to the top, just about to go over the top, and our carriage is just near the bottom, just about to go into the water. So we've got to go on the right-hand side. So the traffic light on the left is red. And we've got to squeeze past these return wheels. You see a better view there of, I'll say, these two half-submerged wheels, which bring the wire up from the bottom of the canal, then over the top and back down and up to the other carriage. We're quite a long way from the bottom of the lift here, so they get a fairly sort of straight pull. And just getting a bit nearer one of them, you see the narrow gap you've got to squeeze through. And then we're on the left and being hauled up there. Here's another boat coming down on the other track, and you can see there heading down, just about to enter the water at the bottom and go past the return wheel and squeeze its way out through the system. The jetties coming out either side so the operators can get on and off the carriages. And at the top, obviously, the rails have to go over the top of a hump so the water doesn't all fall out, and then lower the boats down back into the water. And at the top, if you follow the wires, they go round similar half-submerged wheels and then over a couple of bigger wheels. And the wires, you can see just about heading off to the side there into a winding house, which is driven by this big traditional undershot water wheel. So the wheel's rotating anti-clockwise as we look at it there, with the water flowing underneath it. And that's all the power that's used for driving these lifts. There are no electric motors or anything. It's just water wheel stuff. And the system, it's all, I think, pretty much as it probably was right at the start, because it's all controlled by the gong. And you see the sign here saying, after you've moored the boat, you've got to get a gong. The gong is just a sort of metal disc with a pattern of holes in it, which presumably makes it sound right, and a very high-tech striker, which is made up of a plumbing spare part. So the hammerhead is a plumbing T-piece, but they're surprisingly loud, and they can be heard right at the other end of the incline. And then the operator has to stand by the brake. So this the red thing there with the handle on it, the handle obviously swings around so you can get hold of it with both hands if you need to screw the brake down. Just a traditional screw brake like you'll find on a steam engine tender or anything like that. So very much the original method of working, I think. And so just to go through again our way up this one. Here's our carriage on its way down, nearing the bottom, ready to come into the water to accept us, and the operator walking down the side there, operator there waiting for us to come in, and the carriage is now up against the jetty, so it's mostly submerged, and we've got a green traffic light to allow us to go through. And so just about to go into the carriage with our operator with the blue hair. We'll then hop across to the other side because for some reason the brake is on the off side. I'm not quite sure why. And then the fifth lift, the top of the fifth lift, Virginiets, we get off, and that's actually quite good that you're off there and you can see the boats coming up the lift from the land, because when you're actually on the boat, it's difficult to see what's happening at the sort of wheel level, really. But here you see how the boat coming down the slope, having come over the hill, the boat sloping down, and it's still sloping here a little bit on the top right picture. But by the time it's got in a bit further, you see that the carriage is pretty well level with the water, and the boat is lower down into the water on the level because of these extra rails underwater that catch on extra flanges on the inside of the wheels and lift the front end of the carriage up so that it stays level. And there you see the carriage is nearly up to the jetty on the bottom right there, when the boat will be untied and be able to float off. So these are very much, although they've got some sophistication in terms of keeping the boat level as they go in and out of the water, the rest of it is pretty much the same sort of system as you would see on that picture right at the beginning of the trench incline plane, built in whenever it was, 1790 something. So they're very, very historic lifts, I suppose it's fair to say. And there's plenty of information. There's signs all over the place with the history and explaining how they work and so on. It's in Polish and English and German and Russian. So it's all very well provided for the visiting tourist, really. So this is the top of the lifts. This is now the summit level of the canal at about 100 meters above the port of Elbląg. And there aren't any trip boats actually along this next bit of canal. But there are trip boats when you get to the lake section, and so we'll potter along a bit. We're just at the top lift. Through the canal goes through a long lake. There's a branch off to a side lake there, and then you'll come to a junction where you can either go to the west to Żuławy, or you can drop down some locks. If we're now over the watershed into the Drzewice catchment, you can drop down some locks into the Ostro Lake, and then you can go up some more locks to the very end to Elbląg. So we'll just have a quick final look around that neck of the woods. I mean, here we've got one of the canals that goes off to that lake I pointed out. These are the typical size of the canals between the lakes. So, you know, quite small and intimate, really, the Canal Dudzki. If we then carry on and head to the west towards Żuławy, the canal goes across the lake, but the canal's at a higher level than the lake, so they built an aqueduct. But it's not an aqueduct on stilts like Pontcustlety or something like that. It's basically an embankment with lots of culverts through it. But it was still a major engineering feat when it was built in 1845. You can see the sort of plan there across the lake, and then we go and join another lake. I mean, a lot of the route is going on canals that go in and out of lakes, and eventually we get to the little lake at Żuławy, and there are moorings and you know, very pleasant sort of area to visit. But on that route, we'd come from the right at the top of this picture and gone off to the left at the top of this picture. If we turned left and come down through the lock, through Muamwin Lock, these, as I say, are very much similar sort of size to our narrow locks, a little bit bigger, a bit longer, but very similar sort of thing. And these ones have single gates, the two locks here that drop us down. And you can see, I think this is actually mechanized now, but the old method of operating them with a pole with a rope fastened to each end that goes around a winch, and you hook the pole onto the end of the gate, then wind the winch. Exactly the same sort of thing as you may have been to Amsterdam, where all the floodlocks all around Amsterdam have these poles usually kept vertically when they're not in use, and they're all painted white. And that's what makes Amsterdam locks look like they do, I suppose. So it's a very common system in Europe. Anyway, if we put it down there, we eventually get to Ostro Lake. There's the yacht harbour at Ostro. There's plenty of boat facilities there. It's, I mean, I said right at the beginning, I think, boating is very popular, and there are thousands of boats. But Ostro is, quite a historic place to look at. There's 13th century castle, as you can see at the bottom, and there's even a pier that wouldn't look out of place at the seaside, really. And you can see the number of people there. It's a very popular place in summer. And in the background, I don't know if it's called a cathedral, the two spires of the great Episcopalian church, I think it is. But we can then carry on a bit further. We go up a couple more locks, and these ones have double gates. Very similar to the sort of mixture of things we've got over here, isn't it? Go down the Oxford Canal, and some of the locks are single gates, and some are double gates at the bottom, and so on. And go through the one tunnel on the system. It's only 50 meters long, but connects the two Shellang lakes. And we come out into the middle of a forested area, very beautiful sort of forested area. And at the end of this, there's a little village called Stariobonkey. It's only 700 population or so. And when I was looking this up, I mean, I haven't actually been on this bit yet, on Google Earth. So what are all these patches look like? You know, squares of sand and so on. And although there is a beach and a swimming area protected by these jetties and the boat mooring area as well, as with most of these places on the lakes, they've all got beaches. But this place, apparently a tiny little village in the middle of the forest of Poland, is a famous place for beach volleyball and beach handball, and it hosted the World Championships in 2013. As you can see, it's sort of huge temporary car park in the field on the right and so on. So it must have been quite a surprise if you didn't know about that and you go boating up there and suddenly find a place full of thousands of people playing beach volleyball. But there we are. So that's taken us right to the end of the system. Just a bit about if you want to go on it. If you want to go on the trip up the lifts, you can book online, and the booking site has got an English version. So if you go into that address, it's all in English and very simple to book. And you print your tickets out, and when you turn up, this is the journey for the trip. It's called the boat on the lawn. The boat through the grass is how they market this particular trip, because the lifts are all grassed. And you just wave your ticket at them, and they read your barcode, and that's fine, you know. So you although the guys letting people on the boat could speak some English, you don't have to worry about the language. So it's all by barcodes, and you can have your ticket booked from the comfort of your own home, and you can book a ticket for the return bus as well on the way back. So a whole 9 wattage, I think it was, or something, you know, less than £2 to get the bus all the way back again. So very easy to arrange. But if you want to go boating over there are hire boats on the lakes at Elbląg and at Rubina on the Skarpava, as we saw, and you can book boats for a one-way trip from Rubina to Ostro or vice versa. And you don't need a qualification unless you're going into the port or out onto the lagoon. And the websites all say, so long as you're only going in to the port to get as far as the Gdansk Marina, nobody's going to check you. But obviously the hire boats, before they let you go out in a hire boat, they might want to see some sort of certification. But there's the hotel boat I mentioned. At least we hope that'll be reinstated again once the pandemic restrictions have been lifted. But a lot of it is accessible by trip boat. I think I've mentioned some of these. That's in Gdansk. There are trip boats as far as Subieszewo, which is where the pontoon bridge was, and as far as Westerplatte. There are shorter trips from Szczytowo, from Malbork, and so on. And then you can go up the trip we went on, all the lifts, and you can go from one end of the lakes to the other on trip boats. Or you can get a cruise from Gdansk to Elbląg, which takes a whole day, and you can go out on the lagoon. There are a million ferries across the lagoon. So, you know, if you want to see the area, it's very easy just to go and stay in Gdansk, which is a brilliant place to stay, and get the train to various places and go on trips. You can see pretty well all the system that I've just shown you. So there's the end. Thank you very much. If anyone's got recorded any questions, then Bernard will pass them on to me and I'll do my best to answer.
Okay, no problems. Thank you. My video running. There we go. Thanks, John, very much. It was a great presentation. It's tempting a few people to go to Poland, I think, and look at the trip you've been on. It looks very interesting for everybody involved. A few questions. What is the cost of hiring a boat for a week, and what is the best time of the year to travel?
Well, the best time of the year is to go, you know, probably between sort of May and October, I would have thought, because you have the risk that if you try and go in the middle of winter, things do freeze up, and the locks close in winter if it's frozen. So yeah, I would say go in from late spring through to early autumn is probably your best bet. I mean, as far as the weather's concerned, it's really quite similar to here. Because it's so near the sea, it's quite a sort of maritime climate. And although the Baltic does get colder in winter, and it probably get higher temperatures in summer, it's it's quite similar to the UK really. So yeah, it's no need to sort of say, oh, don't go in August because it's too hot. It'll be fine.
Okay, that's fine.
As far as price is concerned, I have seen the prices and I can't remember. I seem to remember when I looked at them, I thought, oh, that's not too bad. But if I'm sorry, I can't just remember off the top of my head. But if there's if you look on a website called iCharter, which is spelled ICZARTER, you'll find they give prices of a lot of boats from different places. So that there are plenty of prices on the web, but I'm afraid
Okay.
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Right, thanks, John. Another question: can you explain the counterbalance arrangements for the various type of lift, please?
Well, as far as the lifts on the Elbląg Canal are concerned, then the counterbalance, if you like, is one carriage, balancing the other out to a certain extent. But obviously, if the uphill carriage has a boat on it and the downhill carriage hasn't, it's not a complete counterbalance. So it's there still needs to be some energy put in by the water wheel, by the hauling engine. But there are lifts. There are inclined planes, or there have been inclined planes, where if the main traffic has been downhill, where you could get away without any external power. So it's what you call a self-acting inclined plane. These are very common on rope-hauled railways, actually, probably more so than on the canal. If your full boats or your full wagons are always going downhill, then they've always got the weight to pull the empty ones uphill, and you don't need any external power. As far as the vertical lifts is concerned, some of the vertical lifts, like things like Peterborough Lift Lock and Anderton, to some extent, I think Anderton, the rams are connected. The ones that are run by hydraulic rams are often connected. So as one goes up, the other goes down, and you can drive them without any sort of external power, simply by putting a bit of extra water in one of the caissons, or letting a bit of water out of one of the caissons to change the balance. Because obviously, if a boat goes in, it doesn't change the weight at all, because it displaces its own weight of water. But the bigger vertical lifts have all got huge counterweights, so that most of the modern lifts have counterweight systems, so the caissons work independently. So if one of them breaks down, if you're depending on a counterbalance system, if something goes wrong with one caisson, then the whole lift's out of action. Whereas if you've got two caissons and counterbalance weights, they can operate independently. And of course, with places like Niederfinn now, the two lifts there, the old one, the new one, they've only got a single caisson anyway, so they're all counterbalanced, just with huge weights in the side of the structure.
There's another safety question here, supplementary question: what if the cable breaks, the hydraulic rams lose pressure, etc.? What happens then?
Well, on lifts, on the cables, on the Elbląg lifts, yes, if a cable broke there, that's why they need the brakeman, and the brakeman has to put the brake on. And the gradient isn't huge on those. I mean, on some of the older lifts, like the tugboat canals on the Bute Canal and the Shropshire Canal and so on, I don't know what level of safety they had there. I suspect if a cable broke, the boat probably ran down to the bottom of the lift and sank. But as far as the big lifts are concerned, big modern lifts with counterbalance weights, I mean, they've got thousands of cables. Well, hundreds, I should say, the big lifts. And so if one cable breaks, then there's enough redundancy built in that the lift will still function.
Okay, thanks for that, John. It's obviously a wonderful waterway for leisure, but because of the size, is it very well suited for commercial use? Any evidence of that?
Well, the Elbląg Canal itself, there's not really much scope for commercial use, because I said it's a very similar size to our narrow canal. It's just too small. So a boat on the Elbląg Canal, I think the biggest ones could carry about 50 tons. So it's not really viable for commercial traffic. But there is commercial traffic on the other waterways I showed you, certainly on the Martw Wisła and the canals between there and Elbląg. where you saw the bar, the sort of barges that we saw in the picture of Elbląg Harbour, up to 1,000-ton barges. So, and push tows of a couple of 500-tonners.
Okay.
So there is scope there. The locks across there are on the Skarpava, the way we went across from west to east, are 12 meters wide by 60 meters long. So you can get a couple of decent sized barges through.
How do living costs compare to the UK?
I mean, I've only ever been there on holiday. I've never lived there, but certainly
Eating out, things
costs,
like that generally.
Costs generally, eating out and so on. I think it's cheaper. I think it's quite a cheap holiday actually. And hotel prices seemed really quite cheap as well. Yeah. Essential
question, of course, beer and wine prices, things like normal alcoholic consumption.
Oh, well, I mean, Poland obviously is very keen on beer. There's lots and lots of beer. Some of it with names that are really hard to pronounce, but some very nice beers. It does do good wine as well, but certainly in Gdansk, I would say is more of a beer drinking area than a wine producing area.
I think I'll be booking a trip out there by the sound of it, John. Very good.
Oh, yeah, you should.
Yeah. How many trips have you done there? Did you drive or fly?
Okay. Well, the last time, neither. I've done a few trips over there for work because we've been doing some work over there. But when we went on holiday and did this trip up the canal in 2019, we flew to Berlin and spent a week there. Then we got the train to Gdansk, which was very, very simple. Again, you book it online in advance. It's so simple, and a really interesting train journey across the whole of Poland. And then we flew back from Gdansk. But there are flights from Gdansk. Well, there were, depending what happens after the pandemic. As a normal thing, Wizz Air do up to 3 flights a day from Luton to Gdansk, so it's really easy to.
It's not easy trip to make. Okay.
Yeah.
The most interesting part of the ramps to me is the winding engines. You seem to have excluded them from your description, including the water-powered aspect. Comments, please.
Well, I showed you the water wheels. The four lifts are run by undershot water wheels, and the water's just taken from the canal. I mean, the canal is the River Elbląg, really, but the water flow through. You could see where it came out, and it was a pretty small flow, really, that they needed to drive them. I suppose there's quite big diameter water wheels, but you couldn't actually go inside the winding engine house. But I would assume that there's just a big wheel in there with the rope wrapped around it several times in a spiral groove, but in grooves around the wheel, I suppose. Just the same as you'd see in a colliery winding engine is how I pictured it. But no, you weren't allowed inside the engine houses, unfortunately.
Okay, that's good. Is it true that powered craft are banned from some otherwise accessible lakes near Ostrava?
Well, this is this mixed information. I think powered craft were banned at one time from Lake Żuławy, but there are trip boats go up there now. There are powered trip boats go up there, and I've seen plenty of pictures of. Well, there are videos on the web of powered boats going through the tunnel. So I think it's been relaxed. Whether there's a limit on speed and power and things, I'm not sure. But as far as I could tell, because this was something I saw something on one old piece of literature, and I thought, oh, I better check this up. But as I say, there are videos of motorboats going through that tunnel, and the trip boats definitely go up to Stare Bąki. So I think it must have been relaxed.
Okay. Is there a connection through to Russia and Moscow?
There isn't really a totally inland connection, I don't think. I mean, there's a connection through to the Kaliningrad enclave of Russia, obviously at the other end of the Wisła lagoon, and from there you can get onto the river Pregala and you can get through to the Niemen in Lithuania, and that connects with the Augustowski Canal, which has been restored, so that could bring you back into Poland. So there's sort of circuits you could do around there. But as far as getting through to Moscow, I think you'd have to go out into the Baltic and go back in at St. Petersburg. And obviously from St. Petersburg you get to Moscow.
Okay. That route, of course. Okay, there's a pre-World War II film on the internet showing timber traffic man-hauled from the towing path. Is that correct, John? I don't know.
What, on the Elbląg Canal? I wouldn't be surprised.
It doesn't say, but just simply says there's a pre-World War II film on the internet showing timber traffic man-hauled from the towing path.
Oh, I'll have to look that up. I didn't know about that, but it wouldn't, it would make sense. It's all a forested area up the top of the canal, and I'm sure timber was, one of the trades.
Okay, and final one: how did you get started boating in Poland?
I suppose.
What was the attraction, really?
I visited Gdansk many years ago for a meeting for work, and thought it was an amazing city. And I've been there a few times since for various work reasons. And so in 2019, I said to my partner, "Look, I've never taken you to Berlin or Gdansk, and I'll take you there." But it's just that living on a boat and both being sort of waterway nuts, anywhere we go, if there are waterways, we'll go and look at them. So we spent a week in Berlin. We got nearly through the whole week. We thought we've been on a boat every single day. So yeah, it's just general interest in waterways wherever we go.
Okay, the pre-World War II film, David's come back, David Brown.
Yeah.
Yes, on the inclined planes he's talking about.
Ah.
The internet showing timber traffic man-hauled from the towing path on the inclined planes, he's saying.
All right, so putting the timber onto the trolleys, onto the carriages on the inclined plane. Ah, well, yeah, I can see how that would work. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Thanks, David. I should look that up.
And finally, love the jacket, Paul Morgan said. Your jacket, John. Yes.
It's a t-shirt.
Well, t-shirt, sorry. All right.
T-shirt from Crop Ready Festival. Yeah.
There we go, you see. The Crop Ready Festival, man. Thank you all for participating this evening. And thank you again from all of us, John, for, okay. Hang on a sec. He says, no on barges. I'll send him a link. This is David Brown again about the World War II.
Oh, thank you, David. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, David, for that. Really appreciate it. And keep John informed on that. He's really interested, of course. Again, thank you from everybody on this one. And thank you for participation. John, thank you for your wonderful presentation. It certainly makes Scotland quite attractive to visit for boating. And a lot of people are saying thank you for the very interesting talk as well on the chat side as well. And thank you, Gemma Butler from head office.
Thanks, Gemma. Yes, thanks
for hosting it for us. Really appreciate your efforts there, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next one there. The next one is going to be in May. I'm going to have Paul Rogers, IWA chairman, who will be presenting that one, and we look forward to questions and answers on that as well. Okay, John, thank you again. Thanks, Gemma, and we'll close down. Cheers.